Welcome back, brothers and sisters. I am Braden. The gentleman you see opposite me is Tim, and this is Second Legacy, and thank you for stopping by. What we're going to do today is another live call. Now, the reason that we do these calls is we get to the baseline of the Second Amendment everywhere across this amazing nation to see where everyone sits and to let you know you're not alone with your thinking. Now, if you want to be on the show just like you're about to see, there's a Google form right down there. Please make sure that you hit that and fill that out. We'll see if we can schedule and get you on the show. And as we are here, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn the notification bell on. We are looking to grow Second Legacy, and we invite you to do that with us. And thank you for your consideration. I'm going to say a quick word from our sponsor, LAS Concealment, and then we're going to get to this interview. And the content today is brought to you by LAS Concealment. And if you're in the market for a holster for your favorite freedom tool, LAS Concealment is worth a look. They have everything that you could imagine, all molded from Kydex to your said freedom tool. Everything is fit directly to that model for a superior comfort and safety. They have inside and outside the waistband options, multiple designs, all sorts of different colors, and they are tested by the world's most elite special forces. Make sure you check it out. There's a link in the description box below, and thank you so much to LAS Concealment for making this content possible. All right, so as I mentioned, thank you so much to LAS Concealment. Let's get into this call. David, thank you so much for your time, man. What you got for me and Tim?
Yeah, so I was kind of curious, thinking big picture and long-term planning.
Okay.
I've been involved with 3D printed firearms for a couple of years now, and the more I grow in that field and learn some of the community, the more amazed I become every day.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to wonder how to get past some of the FUDs in our community. The technology is there; it's hidden with the materials and the 3D printers now. I've seen 3D printed firearms with multiple stamps on them. I've seen form ones on plastic cans that work. It's absolutely amazing. You look globally over in Burma, the Burmese patriots right now are literally fighting a civil war against their government using 3D printed firearms.
Yes, they are.
And there's no press coverage of that. And back here in the States, we have politicians that are still convinced it's just cheap pieces of plastic. They're going to blow up in your hands. So it's not coming into the conversation to be able to protect our right to, manufacture our own firearms. So the question I'm getting to is, how do we go about working with some of those politicians and, even some of the right-leaning media that might not necessarily have the knowledge and the skill set to cover adequately that, hey, this is here. It is a real thing. The genie's out of the bottle. It's not going back in, and it's here to stay, to get ahead of the politicians and protect these rights and make sure that they're enshrined prior to anybody trying to negotiate them away.
Well, the interesting thing, first of all, that's a very good synopsis. But the interesting thing about where we're going with the personal made firearms with PMFs, Biden hit this really hard when he first was inaugurated through the ATF, through the ghost gun regulations and all these things. And even in that ghost gun regulation and all the ATF rules they made up through the executive actions, they still couldn't stop it. They just said it had to have a serial number on it. And that was an incredibly important piece, because the Second Amendment doesn't say the right to keep and bear arms if they're made from a major manufacturer. It says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So I think the origin, and specifically around the history in our nation, the Kentucky rifles were actually made by Kentuckians. They weren't made by Springfield or Smith & Wesson or Sharps. I mean, Tim, jump in here. What do you think on this?
Yeah, well, no, first of all, I think the 3D printed gun stuff is awesome. And as David brought up, the technology has evolved very quickly. And I remember years ago, I was at, I think it was SHOT Show, and a guy came up to me and wanted to show me something he was working on. And it was a 3D printed knife, and it was metal 3D printed. Now, this was years ago, so I know the technology has evolved considerably, because since then, you have all sorts of major manufacturers out there, Daniel Defense and OSS and other companies, 3D printing metal, suppressors and various gun parts and things like that. A lot of the triggers that are out there are 3D printed. So it's really interesting to see this technology evolve. And I think many of the gun rights groups may not be well versed in the importance of this technology. I think it would be great if there were, I want to call them a lobby, but a group that would approach Gun Owners of America, approach FPC, and have a conversation with them and help steer policy and try to help, kind of head some of this stuff off. But I do know that these gun rights groups do focus on the ability and preserving the ability of Americans to manufacture their own firearms. Historically speaking, since the founding of our country, we've been able to make our own firearms. What's got the anti-gunners scared is the fact that a 15-year-old can download a file, hit print, and make a gun, and that's what they're going to try to focus in on. But the same thing stands in terms of just making guns in general. It doesn't take a rocket doctor to be able to make a gun, even without a 3D printer, right? So, again, I think it boils down to the anti-gunners trying to control fear, use fear as a tool, and try to, demonize the practice of making one's own firearms. But I do see this whole issue kind of shaping the discussion around privately manufactured firearms, because the 3D element of it, 3D printing element of it, seems to be something that is scaring, obviously the anti-gunners, but they're using that as leverage to try to get policies passed. And we got to stop it. We absolutely have to stop it.
And something else that you said that I think is important, David, that you mentioned is the FUDs. It's a funny term. I always laugh when I hear that term, but we all know what we're talking about. The people who are resistant to change, the ones who are saying like, no, this is not the way it should be, whatever it would be, whatever their item that they're really fixated on is. And I don't really use the term FUDs, whatever, it doesn't matter. But the funny point is, it really comes down to those that are resistant to change within our industry. And I'll be the first one to tell you, those are the same people who, when the M16 or the M4 or the AR-15 came out, it was like, there's no wood stock. That's going to fall apart. That's going to be metal. That's going to just be destroyed. Yeah. It's terrible. It's the same kind of resistance to change.
Yep. I even had some firsthand experience with that. So I participated in the gun makers matchup in Pittsburgh earlier this year, and leading into that, when I was trying to source some parts, I called a couple of manufacturers, and some of them, I won't call anybody out, good or bad. Some of them wanted to know more and were super interested in it and super involved. And others were like, yeah, we don't recommend our parts for 3D printed guns. We don't really like 3D printed guns. And I'm like, okay. So it was kind of interesting to see that dichotomy.
Yeah. There's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, like, if you just look at it from a business perspective, the liability,
I would imagine, hopefully that's where they're coming from as a liability standpoint. We don't recommend our parts for 3D printed guns out of fear of failure. If they say, oh yeah, we make these 4 3D printed guns and one fails because somebody uses the wrong material or whatever, it's a bad design, then they fear they might be held liable. I don't know what the reasoning is, but I do think that 3D printing obviously is moving into the firearm space on the commercial side. As I already mentioned, we lots of 3D printed suppressors out there. I mean, it really changed the way Huxworks conducts business, because I've seen how they used to make the OSS suppressors. And the reason they were so expensive is because the machining processes were just insanely involved, and they still couldn't get to where they wanted to be in terms of design because of the limitations of what they could do with CNC machines. 3D printing changed the game for them.
It's incredible.
And so now they can print the most intricate designs, and they don't have to worry about how they're going to get a drill bit in there to cut that part, right? So it is the future. I also have said for years, I'm big into firearms, I'm big into guns and motorcycles, or cars and motorcycles, and you're going to see 3D printed parts for, cars they made like 200 of, and you can't find a water pump for it. There's going to be people who are going to be able to print those just on demand. So it is the future of manufacturing. So anybody that's pushing back against it or trying to stop it, they are a FUD. I mean, I don't use the term either, but I mean, they really are. I mean, you're denying the future of manufacturing. Yeah. And if we want to stay as thought leaders, in the small arms space and supplying our own military with modern weapons, we're going to have to, warm up to the concept of 3D printing.
Well, dude, I mean, it's you're foregoing the future for the current. I mean, if you think about it from their perspective, if you've got hundreds of thousands, not millions of dollars in machinery that forges individual lowers like, Anderson would have, or SIG has their own factories. You have to retool everything as technology changes, which is part of the business cycle, but they're going to resist that the best that they can, right?
Yep. Well, even SIG is pushing 3D parts and cans.
Yeah, but that's the point. Like, it's the race to adopt it, and once it happens, it'll be the standard. I mean, in my opinion, it'll be the standard. I think that 3D printed parts, once the quality and the technology continues to improve to the point where it's indistinguishable, I think you've got a revolution happening there where I can't even really think of a like example, because that opens up the ability of manufacturing to everybody. And you're talking about a boom at that point. I mean, legitimately a boom.
Yeah. Do we answer your question, David?
Yeah.
Sort of.
Sort of, kind of. We talked about it.
I mean, definitely some thought nuggets there. I was going to say, just I guess the biggest thing is just within members in our greater Second Amendment community that might be holding out, that do have a public voice. How do we get them educated and on board to speak eloquently and accurately?
It's going to take time. I mean, honestly, like, it has to become popular enough to where everyone knows there's a market demand for it. And then once there's a market demand for it, they start hiring experts. Then before you know it, marketing comes out, then manufacturing comes out. I mean, that's the way that the cycle works.
I think that foot's well into that door already. There's so many major manufacturers moving that way. The only issue is the anti-gunners are going to glob onto it, as they always do, because they're going to want to stop people from making their own. But that it doesn't matter if it's 3D printed parts or traditionally machined parts. They're just opposed to us making our own firearms. They always have been, and they're always going to be chipping away at that, trying to undo that, 3D or not. Yeah. So that's just the unfortunate reality of constantly battling to maintain our rights.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yep.
Well, David, thank you for calling in. That was a great question and great conversation, because, I was just before you called in this morning, I was actually looking, I was on Twitter, and somebody had posted a bunch of 3D printed various guns and how much they have evolved over the years. I mean, HK91s that aren't breaking after, 10 rounds fired. I mean, a roller delayed firearm is a violent firearm, and there they have a 3D printed receiver. And I thought that was really amazing to see how far it's come, because it has come a long way.
Oh, it absolutely has. And thank you guys for having me on and entertaining my question.
Awesome, man. Thank you for calling in. Folks, if you'd like to be part of the call-in show, you can do that. Just follow the link in the video description below. We'll get you on the show, and you can ask your question, or we can just have a conversation of whatever's at the top of your mind regarding the Second Amendment. Thank you for watching. We'll talk to you guys soon.